Torpedo, watch your position. Okay, we're in. Okay, yeah, we got it at 11 o'clock. Just blew up, Sam. That's torpedo. Just blew up. That was a signal. Okay, mayday, mayday, mayday. Uh-oh. Is that you, Musket 1, mayday? Musket 1, come up. Musket 1, gunfighter 2-6.
You see him, torpedo 2?
Mayday, that's over here first.
Musket 0-1.
Yeah, they've gone off. Musket 1, this is Musket 2 on guard.
Once we gathered ourselves on the ground, one of the first things we did as we got into the Jeep was, what was our escape plan going to be? We knew there were certain things we had to do. We knew we had to create some kind of a bogus mission plan because we couldn't tell them what we were doing. We had to protect the secrets that we had, but we also, because of our code of conduct, said, you're going to have to try to make every opportunity to escape. So we had great plans. It was just tough to execute because there was no place to run, no place to hide. All I had now was whatever little wits that I had about me, trying to overcome this period of total fear. My family has no idea of my fate. And now I have to try to figure out, how do I become the best prisoner of war that I possibly can be? Now you're scared to death. You've been in captivity now for a day. You have no environment around you other than darkness. There's no sound, there's no light, there's no food, there's no toilet. I mean, there is nothing. There's no freedom. So now you're trying to live in an environment where the only items you can control were you. And basically that was just air. You had control of air, which was putrid, but you had control over it. And now you had to just sit there and think, what am I going to do next?
Musket 1, this is Taylor on guard. If you read, come up guard. Suspect Musket 1. Suspect Musket 1 is down.
Italian immigration into the United States really accelerated after the unification of Italy, interestingly enough, around the year 1860. When Italians came to the United States, a lot of them came in from southern Italy rather than northern Italy, where there was a different kind of economy in operation.
I was born in Philadelphia, which is where all of my Italian immigrant grandparents migrated to when they came from Italy. So my father's side came from Calabria, Santa Caterina, and my mother's side came from Abruzzi, in a town called Moradoro near Teramo.
Southern Italy were a lot of farmers, individuals who came into the United States, came in either through the port of New York or the port of Philadelphia, all up and down the East Coast eventually. The percentages you're talking about, something around 4 million Italians entered the United States from around 1880 to 1920.
Somehow they connected, made their way into the States and came through Ellis Island. One time I did some ancestry work with them, and it was really interesting to see how their names were spelt. Sometimes they took multiple trips and their names would be spelled differently on the register. So we have the Galati side and the DeMarco side, and they all migrated and found their way into Philadelphia. At the time, each of my parents were the youngest of 5 siblings that came here. I think it was the oldest 1 or 2 of each family were born in Italy and then came here with the grandparents. So my parents were actually born in America. My father in 1921, my mother in 1924, living in either South Philly or Southwest Philadelphia. And that's where the story started.
In South Philadelphia, among the Italian immigrants, family was everything. It was everything because they were in an environment that didn't understand who they were. It's an environment where they didn't quite, in the first generation, necessarily understand religious bigotry, sense of nativism among the dominant population. They would have felt that family was the way that the old world is preserved in the new world. the best of where they came from, brought into the New World, and can perpetuate their traditions among the future generations that are born over here.
I have so many fond memories of our childhood.
Ralph and I grew up in a typical Italian-American family.
The Italian family that I knew, family was everything.
We grew up initially in West Philadelphia. We lived blocks from my maternal aunts and my maternal grandparents.
Most of it had to do with being together with my cousins, who were my best companions.
And usually it revolved around something festive. It was a birthday, it was a holiday, it was a meal.
So we spent many hours together with them. It was a natural thing to do. It wasn't so much a visit as it was just the way we spent our days.
With our grandparents, our uncles, aunts, cousins.
It was always a meal. And it was always home cooked.
It was wonderful. The dinners were fantastic. The conversation was great. I was the eldest of all the grandchildren. Ralph was one of the younger ones. We got along all the time.
It was like nobody had any money, but you had family, and you did things together.
So I thought everybody was like us. Everybody's close. But I found out later in life that we were the exception to the rule rather than the rule.
Thanksgiving, my aunt would make a big turkey dinner.
We were cousins, but we're more like brothers. People have a difficult time understanding that unless they lived through it.
Christmas was really magical. A big family dinner followed by a 2-hour extravaganza of all the cousins getting together and opening gifts.
My aunts and uncles were just wonderful, supportive, just wonderful people.
And I thought it was superior to what I see today. I think families like this no longer exist.
You realize sometimes how unique your family really was. Maybe not amongst Italian families, but amongst other families.
There's a very specific profile about Italian mothers and their children, and more specifically about Italian mothers and their sons.
She was born Lydia DeMarco. She's the youngest of 5. You know, my mom was a stay-at-home mom. That's all we knew. Met my dad through a job at the Frankfurt Arsenal during World War II, got married in 47. I was born in 48.
And I think what it is they're very protective. Italian mothers like to dote on their children, all of their children. It's not that they don't care about them.
My mom, like most Italian moms, is somebody you just did not want to disappoint. So when you did well in school, you got first honors or second honors, it really made them proud. I mean, very typical mom.
When he came home with honors from school, that was a big deal. When he got hurt, it was a disaster. When he graduated, it was very special.
But I think we were the first generation coming out of this family that relocated and immigrated to this country. So a lot of it was for the first time them appreciating this country and what it's made of through their kids. Seeing them go through school, seeing them achieve, seeing them behave. That's a big deal. The fact that we're not troublesome. You know, we were irksome, but we were not trouble.
But I think as a male-female relationship, it tends to be even more specific between the mother and the son.
I don't know that any of that's unique, but that's the family I grew up in. They just enjoyed life through their kids. It was really good.
They want to make sure that their son's taken care of. They want to make sure that he's fed. They want to make sure he goes to church on Sunday.
My mom raised us. My dad, Dom Galati, he was the typical working dad at the time as we look back. He went to work, the mom stayed home, the moms raised us, the dads provided, and that's the way it was. And we thought nothing of it.
My mom was a really emotional woman, so things that went on in all of our lives, and especially in Ralph's life, had a serious effect on her. She'd cry about things, whether they were good or bad.
The moms were the binding element. They were the glue that held the family together. About the only thing they didn't do was my mom didn't drive. So if we had to go somewhere, I don't think my mom even got a driver's license until I was in high school. course, it wasn't until 1958, I was 10 or 11 when my dad even got his first car.
We spent a good bit of time with Dom. I remember when he got his first car. On Sunday, he would take Ralph and I out, and he would drive through the neighborhood. We would give Dom directions, make a left, make a right, and he would do as we said. And we, as a 7 or 8-year-old kid, that was very enjoyable.
Catholicism was absolutely central to the identity, to the self-identity of these Italian immigrants coming into places like South Philadelphia. You could not separate their religious faith from who they were in Italy or who they were over here in the United States. It was essential to them just as much as the family was essential to them. It's part of their modus operandi.
Being Italian, Catholicism was key. So everybody went to church, everybody did First Communion and First Penance and Confirmation, and it was pervasive throughout my family. So me and my cousins all went through all of this, and it was just the normal progression of our youth. And then being an altar boy and a server, even at an early age, 3rd, 4th, 5th grade, while I was still there in Southwest Philly, was really an important rite of passage. But it was important for my parents through grade school and even into high school, when it could have been cheaper and easier for them to send us to the local public school. It was important for us to continue our Catholic education. So what started in grade school at Transfiguration in Southwest Philadelphia progressed through the years, through all the sacraments, all the things that were important, all the baptisms. I also remember spending more time than I ever wanted to in funeral homes. So the Italians are just crazy when it comes to burials and funerals, in that they feel like they have to go to everybody's services. But that piece of it, the end of the life, from the baptism now through the death, was a normal progression for Italians and Catholics to profess their faith. I always professed that neighborhood was the key. At least in the 1950s, growing up in an environment where, dozens of folks, even sort of your own age, were always available to play around with. You played in the streets, played in the schoolyards, wherever you did, it was a community based on neighborhood.
I lived next door to Ralph until I was 12 years old. We went to the local Catholic school, Transfiguration Parish,
which is now closed. But I remember in first grade, which would have been 1954, 55.
We would wait at the bus stop, and we had lots of friends. The school was overcrowded.
100 kids in our class, led by nuns. So nobody misbehaved. It was all nuns all the time. And it was a great learning experience. It was a lot of structure. And when you're teaching 100 kids at a time, there's not a lot of room for them to be flexible. So that discipline was really an important part of growing up, but also where you grew up in your faith.
After school, we would often be in the neighborhood. We played all sorts of games with a ball. We played cowboys. We would have a holster with a 6-gun. During the summer, we had a small backyard, concrete backyard. We did not have a pool. We would get a galvanized bucket, fill it up with cold water, and put our feet in it. Ralph would have his bucket, I would have mine, and we would play cards. I can't remember whether we played war or we played fish.
Because a lot of the folks in the neighborhood were Catholic. And I don't think until I moved into the suburbs that I even met anybody that was non-Catholic or Jewish. It just seemed like everybody I knew was part of my neighborhood or part of my schooling. So that was really pivotal, I think.
Got a little bit older. Our parents chose to move to the Ridley Township area, and we spent the rest of our years in Folsom on 11th Avenue.
So I think it was maybe November of my 6th grade year, so right in the middle of the school year, we decided to move to Delaware County to a town called Folsom, and that's where the next period of my life started. And once again, went into grade school, but it was a Catholic school. And at that time, it was mixed boys and girls for 6th grade, and then just boys for 7th and 8th. But once again, it was very, very different. So being in the suburbs was much, much different than what I was used to in the city. So now we had a single family home, not very big, but it was a single family home as opposed to a row house. And I remember there were just not that many people in the neighborhood. All new friends that were scattered around a larger population. And I remember that being really disruptive to the extent of being a little bit lonely because you didn't have that community anymore. And then in 1962, graduated from 8th grade and then went to St. James High School in Chester, once again a Catholic school. The story continues. I never knew anything other than Catholic education through college. And St. James was great. That was probably the best 4 years, 62 to 66, that I really ever had. It was a great environment. It was religious there, but also a lot of lay teachers. Once again, no women. So my high school and college years were just guys. But it was a really great environment. It was a chance to finally get outside yourself, develop a little bit, find your personality, but also very religious structure, a lot of religious classes, services, mass all the time, but never in a way that was intrusive or overwhelming. It just seemed to be kind of complementary to the academic environment.
A lot of Italian immigrants to the United States joined the military. And it was part of the persona maybe that was brought with them, that a man will serve his community, even, unto death in wartime. It really becomes a significant element within the broader immigrant population when you get to the 20th century, World War I and World War II. So many Americans of Italian descent. In World War II, the Mussolini was out of power within 2 weeks after the American landings in Sicily because the Italian soldiers did not want to fight against their fellow Italians in the American army.
Being an American was extremely important in our family.
My family has a long tradition of military service.
We were lucky. We were raised by the greatest generation this country's ever produced.
Even though our grandparents spoke Italian, we were never allowed to speak any Italian in the house because we were Americans. Remember who you are. You're an American of Italian descent, period. That's the way it was.
These men and women back there went through the Depression. They then went to World War II, went to Europe, they served, they went to the Pacific, they served. I think it was probably the greatest time in the history of this country where love of country, patriotism, all had values.
All the neighbors' husbands were all veterans. And coincidentally, we lived in a predominantly Italian neighborhood. So they would all talk about, the importance of being an Italian, what it meant, how we represented the country, how we were respectful of the flag.
We said the Pledge of Allegiance in school, and we had to meet our commitment to the country.
And that it was expected of us to follow in their footsteps in some form. Not only follow in footsteps as an Italian, but as a veteran of some sort. Commit yourself to service. Commit yourself to your country.
Patriotism became very important to Ralph and to me, and we had a great deal of pride in what our family had done.
It was a natural progression when you graduated high school. You either went directly to college or you went into the military.
We were educated in 12 years of Catholic school. And of course, Ralph went on to a Catholic education at St. Joe's. I went on to Westchester.
It's now 1965, 66. It's my senior year at high school at St. James, and I'm trying to figure out what to do next. I knew I was going to go to college. My parents really encouraged that.
Parents always want more for their children. And when Ralph went off to college locally, it was a big deal.
And I ended up picking St. Joe's, even though I got accepted to St. Joe's, Villanova, and LaSalle. I picked St. Joe's primarily because, one, the campus felt a little more comfortable to me, and also because they had Air Force ROTC.
Going to college was something that didn't happen in our previous generation, at least not within our family.
I was the first one to go to college of all my cousins. I am like in the middle of 15 cousins, first cousins, and first one to go to college or graduate.
And so having their son go to college was quite an event.
Because I did some service work in high school, I thought that military service might be a good approach for me. Now, some of it was all of my uncles served in World War II. The only one that didn't was my father, who got an exemption for some health reasons. And I still think that over the years, probably one of my motivations was to serve in his behalf.
And then when he announced that he wanted to join the ROTC and become a member of the United States Air Force, that was even a bigger event.
I really worked hard there. I was an English major, which didn't prepare me for anything. The last 2 years, it was only 2 years ROTC. I flourished there. If I found my niche, I did really well. I finished high in the program, and I got accepted into flight school. Halfway through my ROTC career at St. Joe's, I find out that my vision is not good enough to get into pilot school. And now I have to figure out what's plan B. But fortunately, it was just good enough to get into navigation school, which at least was a step in the right direction. So when I graduated, I went right to undergraduate navigator training at Mather Air Force Base in Sacramento. So here I am now with no flying experience, no science background, no math background, nothing. But I was determined because I thought that the Air Force might be my career. So I looked at it as a long-term goal that this is where I was going to be. I think that beginning a progression there when I was commissioned as an Air Force officer, which I think was May 24th, 1970, was the same date as my graduation from college. And at that time, I was actually engaged to my wife. I knew where I wanted to be. I didn't think I was prepared for any of it, although I had a great support structure in my family. So once again, the faith element where I could always rely on that to help me. I was excited about the flying game, although I'd never even been in an airplane.
When he completed his studies, my parents were just beside themselves that their son was a pilot in the United States Air Force.
Risk was important to me, but I knew I had a good grounding in faith and family and things like that that would probably help me through it. I had good confidence, but it was still risky for somebody like me that didn't have any kind of a science or math background to go into flight school. It was a big unknown. As it turned out, as in most cases of my life, I surprised myself. Maybe for the first time, I actually adapted to an environment that was uncomfortable for me. It was a 9-month program that included a little bit of survival training, but I finished in the top 3 or 4 of my class of 45. The nice thing about that was that the higher you finished in class, you got your choice of assignments. So my assignment was going to be the F-4 Phantom, which I knew also that was an automatic pipeline to Vietnam. But if I was going to fly, I was going to fly in a Maserati, not a Mack truck. I picked that, I got lucky, and then I went to a 6-month assignment at George Air Force Base in Victorville, California, the Mojave Desert, and spent 6 months there as a weapons systems officer training in the backseat of the F-4, which was exhilarating. So I enjoyed that a lot, also realizing that I was going to end up probably getting an assignment, even though it was toward the end of the war, to Southeast Asia, which is what happened to me in October. I got my orders to Ubon Royal Thai Air Force Base in Thailand, and I would go there as a weapons systems officer and have to prove myself again.
The path that he chose was something that they supported, and of course, they were always supportive of things that happened within the government and the military. Dad worked for the government for his entire life. So he was always a serious supporter of anything that had to do with the government. And he also was incredibly proud of the fact that his son was a part of the military.
In 1969, I'm a junior in college at St. Joe's. And that summer, I go down the shore, I'm going to Ocean City, and I meet this young lady. And anyway, we hit it off and we started dating. And We got engaged in the spring of 1970. She knew I was going on active duty shortly, so I graduate from St. Joe's in May. I'm commissioned the same day, and a week later, I am off to flight school, and I leave my fiance behind. I didn't know what to expect. I had no connection with the military at all, other than ROTC. I didn't know what to expect in flight school, but I also realized that it was going to be difficult because I didn't know how they handled wives and housing. Understand? I didn't know anything. I also couldn't afford to be distracted, I thought. I didn't know how overwhelming flight school was going to be, so we decided, let's not elope, let's not do anything crazy. We'll get married when I can figure out when I'm going to get a break. As it turned out, there's a Christmas break in flight school, so we said, we'll get married. They picked the date. It was December 26th, the day after Christmas, which was great because the churches are already decorated. We saved a lot of money. So we got married, and then we didn't have a chance to go on a honeymoon because I had to go right back to flight school. So I told her, come on, who gets a one-way trip to California as a honeymoon? That's where we went. And I had 3 months left of that, and then F4 school down in Southern California. And then during that time in Southern California, my wife gets pregnant. By the time I am ready now to go to Vietnam in October of 71, she's now 6 months pregnant. So we decided that she would live with my parents, the crazy Italians that she barely knows, 6 months pregnant. My wife is British. My wife was born in England. She didn't come here until she was 12. But when I met her, she didn't have any British accent, although every once in a while she'd drop a thing like saucepan or something like that, but basically no accent anymore. That was really different. And my cousin Bill was dating an Irish girl. So the times were starting to change a little bit. I mean, she also, aside from not being Italian, she wasn't Catholic. So these are really interesting times, but it was an interesting match. And I finally get to Ubon Air Force Base probably the first week of November of 71. And I'm assigned to the 25th Tactical Fighter Squadron and a famous 8th Tactical Fighter Wing in Thailand. And I start flying missions right away. It was exhilarating. I mean, it was what I had been training for over 18 months. Flying every day, flying combat missions over enemy territory, sometimes over Cambodia, sometimes over Laos. And it was what we did. It was what we trained for. Nobody likes to be at war, but if you're going to go to war, you better be prepared. I'm doing all that and flying, and then on February 10th, my daughter is born. I find out about that through the Red Cross a couple of days later. So at least I knew my family was okay. So for most folks like me that are ever in combat or been deployed, it's always reassuring to know that your families are safe and secure.
Fear levels probably start the morning of a mission and increase, especially if you know where you're going and what the intelligence has said is going to be there. They talk about a red zone and a green zone, at least in my world of flying. I always worried about getting shot up badly. That scared me. I wasn't afraid of bullets or anything. It's almost like I was fearless. But there was that one thing about, let's say, getting mortared. If I'm on the ground at the officers club the night before and we get mortared, all I could picture is, my body in little shreds. That definitely scared me.
We didn't know we were flying over North Vietnam until that morning. And so it was a big secret because there was a ceasefire. So we really were not flying missions over North Vietnam. These end up becoming called protective reaction strikes. In other words, they were shooting at our bases from across the border. It was our turn to go fight back.
Healer, go ahead.
Boy, some days the autopilot does not work right.
That's the section there. So you set up an orbit there. We're going to go in and take a look, so we'll be able to smoke for target ID. Welcome.
We knew from intelligence briefings there were going to be lots of AAA artillery. We knew there were going to be surface to air missile sites. Our job was to find them, smoke them, target them, lead our guys in, and go out and find some more.
Firebird 1, Bear 2. Go ahead, Firebird 1. Roger, Bear 2's been in the area. Never been able to get a hold of you. We're just out of the tanker.
Fear is an interesting contributor here. It's one thing to be nervous and anxious, which everybody was. But fear was not an element that we could accept. Going on these missions, we knew they were going to be difficult, they were going to be challenging, they were going to be shooting at us while we're shooting at them. At any point in time, you could get hit, you may have to eject. We all understood the risks all the time.
You're doing a hell of a lot of shooting.
Okay, Feeler.
Once we got hit that day, all things that we did were automatic.
Okay, we got 2 minute launch, musket's going down. Uh-oh. 12 o'clock, we got a SAM launch. Musket's got a tally on the launch.
Now, the airplane is traveling at over 500 miles an hour, and we're at 35,000 feet, 65 below zero. So when I came out of the aircraft, my helmet was immediately ripped off my head. Normally, they tell you that if you strap it down tightly, it should stay on. Well, it didn't. Luckily, the oxygen mask did stay with me. I was able to hold it because of the low oxygen pressure. I would have been unconscious in no time. So I fell from 35,000 feet, upside down to 14,000 feet. Pressure sensor sets off the timer. The timer runs for 30 seconds, and then the parachute opens automatically. 14,000 feet, I'm hanging over North Vietnam, clouds below me, and AAA, which is anti-aircraft artillery fire, firing up from the ground all over the place. They can't see me, but there's always a chance of getting hit by accident. And then I'm thinking about how I'm going to land, because they give you training about parachute landing falls and all this kind of thing so you don't injure yourself. So I'm thinking about this. However, there was fog all the way to the ground. So while I'm thinking about this, I crash into the ground like a sack of potatoes and roll over onto one side. Luckily for me, I missed what in Southeast Asia is called a bingy ditch, which is their sewage ditch. All their sewage runs through the ditch. Well, I missed the ditch by about 5 or 6 feet, luckily. Otherwise, it would have been a real smelly event. Picked up the seat pack, which has all the emergency equipment, and then I got out of my parachute, threw it into the bingy ditch, and then headed away from a village which was over on my front. In the back of my mind, I realized that in North Vietnam, just outside of Hanoi, there's going to be little opportunity to be rescued. But I had to make the effort. I reached a road embankment, looking for the traffic to stop. There were numerous trucks moving up and down the road. I was expecting that at dawn, which was probably out another 30 minutes away, the truck traffic would stop, because the daylight operations in North Vietnam was highly risky for the North Vietnamese, because our attack aircraft were up and down all day long. As I'm waiting, the sun's coming up, and I hear a burst of AK-47 fire, which comes down one side of my body, and another burst of AK-47 fire down the other side of my body as I'm laying on this embankment. I turn around, and there's these 4, I guess you would say, militia, or actually our North Vietnamese Army regulars, couldn't tell which, pointing their weapons at me. So I surrendered to them. And in true communist style, they came over. First thing they did was take my ring, which was gold. Then they took my watch. And then they took the money out of my pocket and my credit card.
So later on, as it turns out, I'll fast forward a second, as it turned out, one of the things we both regretted, Bill and I, was we never made a Mayday call. As it turned out, we found out that we both made Mayday calls. We found out that we did things automatically. We spent the next day in a Jeep, and we end up in the Hanoi Hilton, probably on February 17th, 1972.
Once we got to the prison in the back of the truck, they threw me off the back of the truck. I had a bag on my head, and I was tied by my wrists and elbows together, placed up against a wall. They took each one of us into an interrogation room. When my turn came, they took me into the interrogation room, told me I was a war criminal and that I was not a prisoner of war and that I could be shot at the discretion of the North Vietnamese government. Whatever they could dream up, they wanted me to sign a confession about that so that they could publish that. I declined to do so, and the guard behind me started to beat on me with his rifle.
Getting captured, I actually didn't know any pilot I heard of, but I didn't know any pilot that got captured, but I did worry.
So I was shot down on February 16th, 1972, but that wasn't even the worst day. The worst day was the next day. So it took us 24 hours to get from our shoot-down location to where I ultimately found out I was in Hanoi. That was my best guess, because we were blindfolded. We just presumed that's where we were going to end up. So February 17th was really the worst day. I mean, I was really scared. I had no idea where I was. I had just been shot down. I was injured with a head injury. I hadn't been fed. I hadn't slept. And now I'm in a cell in isolation in a 6-foot square black room. I had no idea where I was. I had no control over my fate.
You always think nothing's going to happen to the people that you know and love. Unfortunately, bad things do happen to those people.
On the day that we received notification that Ralph had been shot down.
Probably the worst part of the 14 months that Ralph was away was not knowing whether he was alive or dead. You have no idea, unless you go through something like that, what it's like for the family.
There was an evening on December 22nd in 1972, about 1 o'clock in the morning, when my doorbell rang. And when I opened the door, there was the Navy chaplain from Carswell Air Force Base and his wife. And when I let them in, they handed me a letter and said, "Read this."
The first part was horrible, just waiting to find out, is he alive or dead?
A priest that was my teacher from St. Joe's and the captain in charge of the ROTC unit at St. Joe's performed what's called a casualty assistance call. So my wife is now barely home from the hospital with this newborn, living with my Italian parents. And a knock comes on the door, as I'm told, and it is one of my priest teachers and the ROTC guy making this casualty assistance call. Their job was to deliver a message which was, your husband's been shot down over North Vietnam. We think we saw a parachute, but we don't know what his status is. We don't know if he's dead, alive, captured, or missing.
We were in shock, absolute shock. His mother and father just couldn't believe it. And I remember...
I was so terrified that I couldn't even read. My hands were trembling. It was like someone had shot adrenaline into my vein. So they had to tell me what it said and read it for me.
I remember the story my parents told me was they had to console the ROTC guy because he couldn't tell the story. It was just difficult for him to get that out.
We now had to think about this child and what happened to her father. Where was he? And was he ever going to come home? They had no news on that. All they knew was that his plane had been shot down and he and his pilot had ejected. And they gave a Mayday call before they ejected. The darkness loomed over everyone. People were coming to the house, whether they were relatives or friends. And of course, the news had hit the media. It had hit the local newspaper. We tried to accept people's kindness and thoughts, but the fact that we didn't know where Ralph was at all, and was he even alive, was just a horrible thing. That was a Wednesday night that this information came through. The next few days were really, really difficult.
The story that I told my wife was, I'll be okay. However, if you ever get a visit from a priest and a military officer, all bets are off. And I told her the day before I left to go there, don't worry about it. Everybody comes home okay. I mean, I was lying through my teeth. For a 6-month pregnant 22-year-old, that was important for her to hear. So as it turns out, 90 days after I lied to her about that, that's what happened.
And when we finally found out that he was alive, it was a joyous occasion, but you had to live with that pain, not knowing what he was going through every single day.
All they did was pray to St. Jude and St. Anthony, because St. Jude and St. Anthony are patron saints of lost causes and the patron saint of lost items. And that's what they did.
I remember I was still working at Channel 10 at the time, and I would get information earlier than other people because I worked for CBS, and I would get the feeds. And finally, we did get some information that they did have some POWs. And the best thing that ever happened was that the North Vietnamese wanted to publicize that they had American pilots. And they had a lineup, and in that lineup was Ralph Galati. And I remember having the tape and calling my aunt and uncle saying, I got the tape of Ralph. You'll see it on the air tonight. It's great. He's alive. He's well. He's conscious. He knows what's going on.
The first prisoner brought out was Lieutenant Ralph William Galati of Pennsylvania.
It was one of the happier days of our lives to know that he was alive and well. I remember saying, this is great because he's on TV. They can't kill him now. He's probably going to survive this thing, but it's going to be a rough road.
Yes, I'd like to say hello to my wife, and hope she's feeling well. Also my parents and my sister, and hope that our new baby is also doing well and that they're all strong and feeling good. I want to tell them that I'm feeling okay also, feel pretty strong. Say hello to all my family back home and tell them all to write. And I'll try and write some letters also. Probably get them home. I hope I can get some letters here also. And tell everyone to take care of themselves and to keep well.
And that's exactly what it was. He's a tough guy, this Ralph Galati. All his POWs, I don't know how the hell they did it, but they did.
So I lost all of my freedoms that I was used to. All I knew was that the world had changed dramatically. And now I had to reset into going from a 23-year-old, barely military guy, barely adult, into this 23-year-old now prisoner of war that I was not trained for. I am carrying tons of fear. I have lots of disappointment because I feel like I have let a lot of people down.
The solitary confinement cell was a cell that was about 7 feet by 8 feet. It had 2 stone beds, leg shackles on the bottom. It had a very small, narrow window that was very high. It had a single light bulb hanging by a wire from the ceiling that was on all the time. And it had a steel door that creaked, and it had a very heavy metal bar that they would slam open and shut. Again, that was part of the intimidation process. They also had a small window they could look in. They would open the window and look in all of a sudden and then slam the window closed again. Inside, there was a single bucket for our use, and I had my clothes that I was wearing and a straw mat.
February in Hanoi is cold, surprisingly. Even though it's pretty far south, the temperature there, because of the winds and the mountains and the Chinese border, it is pretty cold. It'll get down into the 30s at night. And we never had any kind of ventilation. So when in certain rooms, you would have window holes, but not glass. So basically, you were living outside temperature. And when you had nothing to wear other than a set of pajamas, you might have socks, you don't have blankets, you might have a mosquito net in the summer. That was it. There were no pillows, there were no blankets, there were no beds. And I got very used to sleeping on cement. I got very used to having roommates that were rats. You got very used to total reliance on whether they brought you food or not, whether they brought you water or not, whether they let you empty your bucket or not, whether you were allowed to go outside or not. So when I mentioned that you lost all of your freedoms, it is even some of the basic essentials like that. I'll give you an example. When you ran out of toilet paper, you were out of toilet paper. Now, their toilet paper were like those old brownish paper towels that you used to find with sanitation workers. They were coarse and hard and nasty. But when you ran out, you didn't knock on the door and say, refill, please. I mean, it was it. And if they chose to give you none for a week, you had nothing. Even the basics of toilet paper and water, any kind of clothing, were really issues that you just didn't know how to contend with.
They did come in every day and try to do an interrogation, and they wound up giving me a book where I was supposed to sign a confession and write my entire history. That was the only time I did any creative writing in my life. I was not very good with English. I didn't want to over-exercise because the diet
sucked. So if you like insects in your food, then the food was okay. But you had no idea what you were eating. You just ate to survive. And we're there for 4 to 8 years. We're really abused on a regular basis. But then the press started to get wind of this. POWs got released and came back and said, the treatment up there is not what they claim it to be. Things got a little bit better, and then Ho Chi Minh died. And I think with new leadership, things evened out a little bit after 1968. The worst beatings that I got was landing after my ejection. So I know that the townspeople there were going to kill us. So they ripped off all of our heavy equipment. They stole what they could. They beat us and were going to kill us. At least I think they were, until a local militia guy saved us. So I was already starting off with some injuries, going into now this period of trying to figure out how am I going to adapt to being a prisoner? How am I going to handle myself during interrogations? And then they were bringing in, after 24 hours of no light, 24 hours of heavy light, 24 hours of cacophonous music coming in the door, being yanked out for an interrogation. That kind of cycle was really disturbing. And it was just hard to be on your A game.
It was a time when the negotiations were going on. Richard Nixon was the president. Apparently, he felt that the North Vietnamese were stonewalling in negotiations. He ordered all of the air assets the United States possessed, Navy, Air Force, Marines, Army, everything that we had, convinced the North Vietnamese that they should come back to the negotiating table. And it included B-52s. At that time, I was a co-pilot on a B-52.
Over the years, people might ask, what is the most important day you had, or what was the day that impacted you the most? And even though your repatriation date was really important, I have to tell you that the end of December of 1972, there was about a 10 or 12-day period when the B-52s bombed the hell out of Hanoi.
Linebacker 2 operation started on the 18th of December in 1972. We flew the first 2 nights, but those nights we attacked outside of the city of Hanoi in the areas attacking power generation stations and supply depots.
And you have to realize, dozens and dozens of sorties of B-52s, each carrying 100 bombs for 10 or 12 straight days. That is really impactful. Now, we are, as POWs, we're on the receiving end. So we're in downtown Hanoi. The B-52s are bombing all around us.
The next night, we went into Hanoi, flying at 35,000 feet. We were doing about 500 miles an hour plus. It was the middle of the night, 3 o'clock in the morning. As we arrived toward the target, you can see the surface-to-air missiles come up through the undercast that was below us. You could see a flame light up on the ground, and then as it pierced the overcast, you could see this telephone-like object with a tongue of flame out the back coming up. And they were all over the place from one side of us to the other, striking other aircraft, not only the B-52s. As we got closer to the target,
it was interesting, it was exhilarating, but once again, it was fearful because B-52s back in that era, bombing at 20, 25,000 feet, the wind could shift a little bit. Those bombs came really close to us. And the last thing we really wanted to do was be killed by B-52 bombs. I remember that time period as being significant in that we realized that the only way we were getting the hell out of town was for us to bomb the North Vietnamese into submission. And that's pretty much what the B-52s did.
I remember Ralph's reaction to Nixon's Christmas bomb in '72. I said, were you scared? He said, no, they knew where the POWs were. He said, when we heard the B-52s overhead, we knew we were going home.
Where we made a turn, as we made the turn, the surface-to-air missile struck underneath our left wing. When it struck under the left wing, it set 3 of our engines on fire on that side. The B-52 has 8 engines. The aircraft commander continued on toward the target. Once the power was back on, it activated the bombing and navigation systems. We got to the target, released the bombs, and we were struck by a second surface-to-air missile, which was struck behind me, between myself and the electronic warfare officer, who was about 20 feet back in a separate compartment. Unbeknownst to me, because on the right-hand side, as a co-pilot, I can see the right wing, but I can't see the left wing. The aircraft commander can see the left wing, but not the right wing. He looks at me, finally, I guess he's made his decision, and he goes like this. And I said, oh, that's great. The aircraft is fine. We're going to make it to the coast. Apparently, that was not exactly what he meant. So he gave me another signal, and I'm saying, yeah, that's great. We're going to make it. And then he looks at me, probably thinking that this must be the stupidest co-pilot on the planet. He then ejects from the aircraft, so I'm sitting there. He's sitting next to me in 1 second, and the next second he's gone, and I'm the aircraft commander. So I decide that's probably not a position I want to maintain. So I followed him and ejected out of the aircraft as well.
The peace agreement was signed in January, and notifications were sent out sometime after that about when the prisoners were going to be released.
I was the only Iraq War veteran in Congress. So for me, I look at the Vietnam veterans in Congress, people like John McCain and Jack Murtha, who had served.
The week before, 2 weeks before he was released, my family received a phone call from Senator John McCain. He wasn't a senator at the time, but he called.
I will tell you, knowing John McCain, I only got to know him because of Ralph Galati. When I told him the first time, Senator, it's an honor to meet you. I'm congressman from Northeast Philadelphia in Bucks County. But I'm friends with Ralph Galati. He lit up. He's like, hey, Patrick, you let me know whatever you need. Let me know.
And he spoke to Rosemary, my sister-in-law, and told her, I saw Ralph and he's doing okay, and he'll be home soon.
Those two had a bond, like all POWs that are in captivity together. They have a bond. It is like twin brothers. They will fight to the death for each other because they have gone through the worst. They have seen evil with their own eyes. They have gone through, frankly, things that you can't describe.
He was one of the highest ranking officers in Hanoi Hilton. That was pretty unique to have that information.
And so for me to see that brotherhood in action, to see them, what they went through, to know about them, to know that Ralph Galati and John McCain are these two national heroes that I read about, that I learned about, that I got to know personally, is an honor of a lifetime.
The activity started to build because it's, oh my gosh, it's going to be real, because we heard from him and he's saying he's coming home. So it was a couple weeks later that Ralph was scheduled. We traveled, my parents, of course, Rosemary and the baby, and my cousin came with us, and we traveled to Andrews Air Force Base in Washington, which is where he was going to be returning.
And one of the best days of our lives, our family lives, was the day he did arrive. We were allowed to see him come off the plane.
We were all standing on the flight deck. I was holding Christine.
Coming back from Vietnam, We stopped in Clark Air Base in the Philippines, then Hawaii, and we were dropping people off and picking people up. And they kind of told us what was going to happen when we finally made it back to the States. They told us, you'd probably be met by your family, but they didn't know the details because I was one of several being dropped off there. And I didn't know what to expect. It was a terrible day. It was a rainy day. There was press there. There were people there. We were dumbfounded. We just didn't know what to expect other than the fact that we were being treated really well.
The plane had landed, and when the door opened and he came out, we just charged toward the plane. And I just remember I took Christine and passed her on to him because I thought he had never met her. She was 13 months old at this point, almost 14 months old, and they had never seen each other.
So it turned out my wife and daughter met me. I held her, she started to cry, and I had to turn it back over. You say a few words to the microphone, and then, you get to run over and you meet your mom and dad and your cousins. And it was probably more of a relief.
I think it was overwhelming for him at that point.
It was a great day. It was a great day for my aunt, my uncle, my cousin Linda, his sister, and the rest of us. It was wonderful.
My mom was restrained by my cousin Bill, who was there, Baldini, basically saying, you can't be the first to meet him. It really should be his wife and his daughter.
I laughed because they told my Aunt Lydia, you can't run out there. You're going to have to wait till he comes here. And I start laughing, thinking, I don't care if they had 10 Marines there holding her back. She was going to get him. And sure enough, he walks off the plane and she takes off and no one got in her way. It was like trying to stop a raging bull. And it was just a fantastic time.
I remember my mom saying, typical Italian mom, you're really skinny. I look skinny. I was skin and bones to them. Of course, with an Italian family, nothing like food. Food will fix all ills. So I got to make you a good meal, except I'm down here in Andrews Air Force Base in Maryland. Not much I could cook for you. But when you get home, you're really going to get a lot of Italian food. We got to beef you up a little bit. So food is the greatest therapy for Italians.
When we returned to our home in Folsom, Ralph was not aware of the fact that the local community had planned a parade. There were people from an entrance off of I-95 all the way down to my parents' house where we grew up, and it was jammed. There were people all through the streets, kids on bikes, fire trucks, police cars, all kinds of things with big banners, welcome back, Lieutenant Ralph Galati. And it was great. It was delightful. There were relatives, all of our relatives were there at that point because they knew the day and time that he was scheduled to return. So we all thought this was a wonderful way to welcome him back, and it was. People all knew his story, so they were very happy to see him. But then when we got into the house at some point, after all of this, it was quite apparent that it had a really strong impact on Ralph. This is a man who just spent over 13 months, part of which was in isolation, part of which was in some 4x6 cell or whatever it was, on his own, not knowing what was going on in the rest of the world. And it was a difficult acceptance for him. People talked about him as if he was a hero. And I think that was one of the things that was hard for him. And even till today, he still says, it's the ones that were there. It's the ones that were on the ground. It was the ones that never returned that were the heroes. So it was very hard for him to have all of this attention thrown on him, I think, so quickly. What he really was looking forward to was trying to spend some time with his wife, with his baby, and of course, with my parents and myself.
When Ralph finally arrived back in Folsom, the family was obviously there. Every single member of the family, the extended family, it was a fantastic time. The best thing was that everyone in the family wanted to do something special for him. Everybody had a lunch for him, a dinner for him, or breakfast. Whatever he wanted, he got.
So let me now talk about readjustment within the Italian family that I have. 5 brothers and sisters on my mom's side, 5 brothers and sisters on my dad's side, and dozens of cousins. Everybody was really glad to see us, but everybody was a little bit tentative. Tentative because they just didn't want to ask the tough questions. They were like, well, if he wants to talk about it, he will.
I remember having to talk to him. Nobody knew what to say. It was incredible because they were always afraid that if you asked him what it was like, it would hurt his feelings, and except me. I'm going to be honest with him. I'm going to tell him what it was like when he wasn't here, how people felt about the war, but how they felt about the POWs, which is an entirely different thing. Everybody was in favor of the POWs.
I had no problems talking about it, but I didn't feel like introducing it to them. I figured if they were curious, they would ask me, and I would answer any questions they had. Of course, they were harboring all these horror stories, what they had heard or read about from other people, or what they read in the press, or what former POWs had already mentioned that got released before me. So, they really didn't want to probably get into the horror stories. That was okay. But I remember some of them saying after a while, she says, I went to one of your speeches. Do I have to go to your speeches to hear what's going on with you, what it was like? And I'm saying to myself, well, all you had to do was ask. Me coming into this new world was, I think, disruptive. And I understood that. My wife told me, and other people told me, it's going to take some time for her to adjust to who you are. Matter of fact, when I first landed, my daughter was crying at the airport and found out that night she ended up having a fever. We had to call the doctor in. It was a difficult time, just that first day, and kind of unsettling, where the first time in 14 months she'd even been sick. So, welcome home, Dad. That transition was difficult. We had 90 days of convalescent leave at my parents' house before my next assignment. So we had 90 days to kind of get together and her see who I was, not to disrupt the grandparents at all. And then when we left to go on assignment now, it's just me and Rosemary, me and my wife. I think that was difficult for a while to figure out, where did my other parents go and who's this guy coming into our life? But it settled in over time. It got a little more settling when our son was born a couple years later. We ended up being a little more of a normal family. There was always that little bit of disruption and uncertainty for my daughter to figure out who this guy is. My wife at that point had not yet turned 22. That's how young she was. So she was a really young, at the time, a really young mom. So she brought up this daughter living in my parents' house. One of the things that helped them all was we had a pet dog named Sadie, and they had a daughter. And she was kind of the binding force for this family, both in terms of helping my parents and my wife. That really occupied them a lot because a brand new baby from birth till 14 months is a handful. So I think it helped all of them. My dad was really got great therapy from my dog and also great therapy in walking the baby. For all she knew, my parents were her parents. So it was a little bit different. She knew who her mom was, but she didn't have a dad.
PTSD is really, most therapists see it, is a normal reaction to an abnormal event. The kinds of things most people don't see during their lives. And the reason that happens is because our bodies are designed by nature to be able to react in a life-threatening situation or a situation that's so horrific or threatens someone else's life who's close to us. So if our bodies are designed that way, why does this lead to PTSD? Well, if the reaction is strong enough and we don't have the ability at the time to process it, it's so overwhelming, it can get stuck, and we don't move beyond it.
You've probably heard the term about veterans suffering in silence. And even though it's been more than 50 years, in some cases 60 years since the Vietnam War has ended, there are still veterans my age in their mid-70s to early 90s that are still suffering some of the after effects of combat.
For me, trauma took two pathways. One was a physical pathway, which is a result of getting shot down or crashes, or basically getting blown up a couple times. That was always there, like in my body, the pain in my body, then triggered something in my head. Then there was the pictures that you have in your head, which, forget about dreaming. I'm talking about walking down the street in Philadelphia, and I'm seeing stuff. I am actually in a combat situation. And I would have to stop and just breathe a little bit.
PTSD is hard on families too, especially when a soldier has been a prisoner of war. It's hard to watch a family member suffer. It's hard to watch some of the behaviors that they have, because some of them are really scary. If you have children at home, especially, they don't understand what's happening.
Stuffed all this PTSD and all these memories into sort of a box, and I kept sitting on the box to keep it all under control. Toward the end of my flying career, things started to come out.
Couldn't get the treatment that they needed because at that point, nobody was really talking about PTSD. It was really an uncomfortable time for many of us, at least for me, to be treated differently than everybody else. It was uncomfortable. So it took a couple of decades after I got back that I was in for a VA physical for some other disability. And I remember the doctor looking at my military records and saying, "Galati, you don't have PTSD on your disability. Why is that?" And I said, "Because I'm okay." And he said, "Well, do me a favor. The psychiatrist next door is available." He said, "I'd like you to just chat with him for a couple of minutes." So I said, "Fine." So I start talking to this guy, and he starts asking me these really intriguing questions that nobody had challenged me on in over 20 years, maybe 25 years. And it's going on for an hour. And finally he says, "Let's just take 5 minutes." And I said to him, "By the way, how am I doing?" And he said, "You got issues." And I remember that clearly. Like, he said it so casually. And then we finished later on, and he was right. You know, there's just a lot of things that I had buried, but I felt that I was okay because I was living a normal life, I thought. You know, I had a wife, I had kids, I had a job, I was doing okay. So it was really hard to get to the nub of things.
Over time, what I really discovered, and this is the most important thing of all, I was always on guard. On guard, always. There was very few moments when I wasn't on guard. So if I was being pressed, like in business, even in the military, and then on and on and on, I was always ready to fight. Sometimes I argued, but I was so tense, being on guard, expecting something to come in on me, expecting to be hit, crash, to get shot at, to hear sounds. And I guess I just looked like a normal guy, but I wasn't normal at that time. I was overcompensating. Everywhere I went, everything I did, building a business, I was overcompensating for it. And it took a toll.
My wife was thinking that she has, much more of a recollection of this than I do, but my recollection is that she didn't know who that person was that she was married to. All of a sudden, I had changed into a different person.
I thought that I was okay, but then again, we probably all thought we were okay. I was very much introverted. I was very much closed walls around myself, become a little desensitized, kind of impersonal, sometimes very passive, but also just unwilling to argue. That I don't challenge not so much authority, but I avoid conflict sometimes. It was almost like protecting myself like I did during interrogations or during prison, which is don't let them see the real you. You got to be this model prisoner that they're not going to get anything out of. And if I show myself, they might see a side of me that I don't want them to see.
a returned POW who wants to sleep on the floor of a closet in a sleeping bag because they have been confined in a small space, a small cell, or even a tiger cage, and don't feel safe sleeping in a bed in a normal-sized room. They feel too vulnerable. There is a tendency for some returned POWs to want to deal with the helplessness that they felt when they were captives by over-controlling things in their own lives or over-controlling their family. Sometimes they expect their children to be like little soldiers and say, yes, sir, do everything exactly the way their dad wants so that they don't provoke an outburst of some kind, so they don't get him upset.
Even to this day, something's there all the time. It's there. I don't think it stops me anymore. You know, I've made peace with it. From the worst situations people could imagine, I have made peace with it.
So the value sometimes of these therapies with really trained professionals, and they really had to be, because we were so unique that most people that did these things had no experience with POWs. They were more fascinated than we were. They really would have to dig hard and challenge every one of our assumptions to find and glean something out of us that we had probably hidden for decades.
And for spouses, there's also the experience of feeling like you're walking on eggshells. You don't want your guy to get upset. You don't want him to become irritable or explosive. You don't want him to have a meltdown. So you try to control everything around you and tiptoe around him, making sure that everything is perfect. And you can end up with a feeling that everything you do is wrong.
I have to hand it to my wife, Rosemary, because I am sure that when I got back, and for a couple of years at least, I felt I was fine and okay, but she saw a slightly different side of me than I would see. She would joke about me, but it wasn't a big joke, that when I was out with other people, I was Mr. Personality, but when I was home, I was very subdued and quiet. I'm not sure what that was all about, but you can guess what captivity may or may not have done to you. I really feel for the guys that were there for lots of years, trying to fit back into not just society and the military, but also trying to fit back into a family that had just moved on without them for years. These 6- and 7-year-olds that they left were teenagers now that grew up with just their moms. Thank God for the moms. They really had sacrificed beyond what they are qualified and trained for. And she hung on there really well. I'm sure the adaptation for me, which I thought was seamless, to her was probably more disruptive and a balancing act. And I think she handled it really well. So now it's 1978, and I've just served 8 years on active duty, and I decide with my family that it's really time to move on. I enjoyed everything I did. I had a great career. I enjoyed the flying. But in some cases, as a POW, I never knew what I got that I earned versus what I got because it said POW on my record. I figured the only way to find out is to go into the civilian world. So I had applied to IBM a number of times. Matter of fact, I still have all the reject letters from all the IBM offices I sent to. The nice thing was I did a lot of interviewing with IBM in Wilmington, Delaware. And one of the guys interviewed was a Marine Corps veteran. The other guy was an Air Force veteran. And so we had something in common. I never hid the fact that I was a POW, but if they asked, I would tell them. Anyway, I got a job there. And as with most of my career, I don't think I was ever qualified for any job I stepped into. And every job I stepped into, I thought was high risk because I never felt that I had the credentials. Coming out of St. Joe's, I was an English major going to flight school. I'd never been in an airplane. So, I mean, this was high risk for me. Getting out of the military, going into a high-tech business without that kind of background, I thought was high risk. 1978, 79, they were hiring college graduates. They weren't hiring 31-year-olds. And as it turned out, I spent 28 years there, and I kind of thrived. It was great. I started right before PCs came out. So this was before 1981. It was very extraordinary. It was very developmental. It was very maturing. And during that same time, once I got some credentials and experience, started developing my love for teaching. And I started to teach at local colleges and universities in the area of information systems. Not so much the technology, but how to use information systems to make businesses more successful. I taught at Widener for a bit, and Cabrini and Wharton, and then finally at St. Joe's. And I think the combination of my military experience, my teaching experience, and my business experience, which was 30 years, really helped me when later in life, when I was doing my work with veteran services, gave me extra credibility because I could speak to veterans about any of those areas because they all had issues. You know, how to find a job, should I go to school, what's it like in the military? So I think that helped round out my personality, but also my skill set to be more of a mentor for young veterans. My kids are now 50-ish, 52. My daughter obviously was really young when I was in the military, and my son was young as well. So they didn't really have a lot of familiarity or knowledge of what it was like being in the military. They moved a couple of times, but that was about it. Once I got out of the military, and they were, 3 and 6 years old, I was a civilian. I mean, I worked for IBM. And that's the life that they remember, of the life of a father that traveled a lot, that was a good provider, but they were raised by their mom. And I've always told them that, your mom raised you. Your father provided for you. And it wasn't until my retirement, when the kids were older, that I started to do more around public speaking and getting involved with veterans, that they kind of saw a different side of me than just this business guy that they knew. I never concealed the military side of it. It just was buried for a lot of years because my career was now my career. Now that they're older, I think there's a renewed appreciation for that. My granddaughter's a little bit different. She understands a little bit about what's going on. She's only 12 now. She knows I'm a veteran, but she doesn't know about all the military and the POW stuff. She knows nuggets of it, but I think now that she's getting a little older and they're starting to get some history lessons, she's starting to see that piece of it. I retired from IBM in 2007, I think, after 29 years, and worked a little bit off and on and still trying to find your way into retirement. I spent about 2 years part-time, Delaware County Veterans Affairs, and I really enjoyed that. It was a great opportunity to help veterans, but I'm really retired. And then I get a call from my St. Joe's classmate, Joe D'Angelo, who's the dean of the St. Joe's Business School. And we graduated together in 1970.
Ralph Galati had been away from the St. Joe's community for a while. From when he stepped down from working, I had not seen Ralph in a little while. An opportunity presented itself to start a program for veterans. An alum was willing to provide some seed money to start a program with Syracuse University.
And he says, I got a funder, I got an alum that's a veteran, and he really liked the program that he saw on television, 60 Minutes, out of Syracuse University that does entrepreneurship training for veterans. And he said, if you could become part of that program at St. Joe's, I'll give you some money, and I'd like to be able to fund that. Joe calls me up, and I said, I'm retired. He said, no, I want you to come back and create the Office of Veteran Services and, build this program.
And when I mentioned it to Ralph, his eyes lit up.
Independent study program that's instructor guided, giving them an opportunity to get education on basic business fundamentals.
So much so that Ralph actually went to Syracuse on his own to visit their program, to see what they were doing. The application process took over a year. Ralph was anxious to get started and volunteered to start a program on his own, which we did. And it was very successful. And based on that, Syracuse then invited us in to the program.
We started with that part-time on my own in 2012, and finally, I think it was 2014, they brought me on full-time, and we opened and started this Office of Veteran Services, myself and a young veteran named Andrew Colquitt.
From the moment I first encountered Ralph, I instantly knew I liked the guy. He just told it like it is, and that's what I'm always looking for in other people. And obviously his background was appealing and interesting, and I had a lot of questions. He had a lot of questions of me as a post 9/11 veteran, and we bonded over that. We worked together professionally in government previously, and then we both joined forces together at St. Joe's University to run the entrepreneurship program and became dear friends. My kids call him Uncle Ralph. He's been to family gatherings. I've been to family gatherings with his family, and I would call him one of my closest friends.
We used the Syracuse program as a base for our own program, which we called the Veterans Entrepreneurial Jumpstart. And within 8 months, we went from nothing to building a curriculum, to building a faculty, to recruiting veterans as students worldwide.
So the program very much bore Ralph's imprint, and one of the impacts of that was after the first iteration that there was, in fact, more than enough content in the week's worth of the boot camp here on campus, with working lunches and presentations during dinner and beyond. So one of the things that evolved over time was to cut back a little bit on the content so that people had a chance to catch their breath and digest what they'd already heard.
I was lucky enough to be involved with the Delaware County Veterans Memorial in Newtown Square through one of the founding members, Linda Holden. And during that experience is where I met Ralph Galati. I worked with board members, committee members, men and women of all branches of the service. Ralph was an active member of our board. You never knew his background unless you knew what he had experienced.
Ralph joined the organization at that. He's currently the vice president, and he just brings a wealth of information about what we're trying to accomplish at the memorial. The memorial is solely dedicated to remembering those who served and those, especially those who gave all.
But on the Veterans Memorial, he was very giving and never said no to anything that came up for him to help with and do.
It wasn't until toward the end of my IBM career, maybe 30 years after returning from Vietnam, when I started to be a little more engaged with veterans and doing public speaking, that I found that the public speaking really was good therapy for me. Where a lot of veterans would have a hard time talking about their experiences, for me, even though my memories were poor, I had enough details that I could tell a story, and it was kind of therapeutic a little bit. And people enjoyed it because it was unique. And I would always tell people that I'm not telling you anything that is brave or heroic, it's just unique. But I found that people still maintained a lot of interest. I got to meet fascinating people that I would have never otherwise met, and I got a chance to maybe release a few demons at the same time.
Speaking about my friend Ralph Galati, a 14-month prisoner at the Hanoi Hilton in North Vietnam, is an honor. One thing that I remember mostly about Ralph in all our conversations, you can never focus any praise or pats on the back to Ralph. It's always about the veterans. The average Vietnam veteran that never got a parade, the ones that got spit on at the airport, or beat up at the airport, or couldn't get a job. Ralph always felt that he got a parade coming home, that he doesn't deserve any praise. It should go to the veterans that came home and were forgotten about.
You talk about a person that has some of the most strongest character and integrity that I've ever met, and values, and continuous drive for having a good time in life. If you think about the people where they are, right, and how they grow, as we get older in life, it sometimes means you start pumping the brakes. But why is Ralph never pumping the brakes? It inspires me every single day.
I met Ralph at a business meeting, sitting around a conference room, about 20 people. And each person had to introduce themselves. Some of the speakers or the moderator introduced us also. So when they got to me, they said, well, this is Larry Liss, and he's a real hero, and he has all these medals, and blah, blah, blah. On and on and on. I'm looking across the table at this little guy, and I know him to be Ralph Galati. I knew that he was a POW. So they're talking about me. They had no idea who Ralph Galati was. Even though they said, oh, he was a POW. They had no idea what that meant. None. And it blew my mind that they didn't know. People talk about me like I'm a hero. Galati is way beyond me. Way beyond me. I can't say it any other way. It's hard to hold back the emotions with this guy. What he went through and who he is today. All he is one big service. All service, especially for veterans. A couple times I've called him for help. He was right there. I mean, he didn't have to set up an appointment or anything. He would call me and guide me. And he's like that probably for thousands of people.
There's this appreciation, I think rightfully so, not so much Ralph Galati, veteran, but Ralph Galati, who supports a lot of veterans' causes. So if you ask them about what I do, a lot of them will say, helping other veterans get their benefits, mission accomplished.
The POW MIA chair that you see all over the United States of America, whether it be in college campuses, whether it be in baseball stadiums, football stadiums, or whether you see it outside of American Legions or VFWs, is a sign of the over 80,000 servicemen and women that are still lost and not recovered and not home. Their remains not brought back home to the United States to be buried properly with military honors or to return to their families to be buried in their family plots. This is a promise that's been made by the federal government. And it was a promise made to every veteran when they raised their hand to join the military and die for their country, that they would not be forgotten, that they would be brought home. To this very minute, we have 6 or 7 teams out of Honolulu that are constantly going all over the world looking for remains, whether it be in Laos, Vietnam, Korea, Africa from World War II, World War I. These chairs are left empty waiting for a service member to come home and someday sit in the chair of the promise that was made by the federal government when they raised their arm to go fight for their country, to serve their country, and even die for their country, that they would never be forgotten by their country, and that their remains, if they don't come home, we will never stop looking for them.
So Ralph Galati recently wrote an article in the Philadelphia Inquirer in the editorial section, and it was with regards to Memorial Day. And Ralph went on to say how Memorial Day now is a time for celebration and festivities. in Ralph's opinion, it's a time for remembrance, not for festivities. It's a time to remember those that have made the ultimate sacrifice in protecting our freedoms here in the United States.
Whoever chose Ralph Galati to be the Grand Marshal of the Veterans Day Parade really made a brilliant choice, because he is not only locally known, he's nationally known.
Let's talk about November 9th and the Veterans Parade in Philadelphia. It was a really great honor to be asked to be the Grand Marshal of the parade. I had been avoiding parades for 52 years, mostly because they were uncomfortable for me. While I appreciated the invitations, it was difficult coming back in 1973 and being welcomed home as a former prisoner of war. But it was also uncomfortable because 3 million veterans had served and really didn't get a parade or even a welcome home. That was the one and only one I had done up until this one. So it was really a great honor to be recognized, do it in my hometown of Philadelphia, representing veterans in general, Vietnam veterans in specific, and former POWs, and being able to talk about the missing in action and their families and Gold Star moms. That was really important to me.
He's the perfect person to exemplify the whole purpose of being a veteran.
With the promotions that they had done prior to the event at local television stations and radio outlets, it was important to get the word out to encourage veterans and their families to attend the event with the hope that maybe we can get a handful of them to go out and get their benefits or try to get more information about what is available to them as veterans and family members. So I'm hoping that we touched some of those to take action, maybe touched somebody to avoid taking a wrong turn. And that was important to me, which is why myself and my other handful of my posse of Vietnam veterans that marched in the parade, it was important for us to go out and greet the crowd. Not sit in a car and wave to people, but go out and shake hands and encourage them, thank them for attending, taking time out of their schedules in marginally good weather with a little bit of rain. But the important thing was to go out and thank them for remembering us, for never forgetting veterans in general and the Vietnam veteran era, being able to represent my colleagues as best I can.
Purple Heart and Prisoner of War Medal, each a testament to his courage, sacrifice, and service.
When I heard just recently an Italian-American, Ralph Galati, is going to be the Grand Marshal who served our country in Vietnam. He was a POW, and it's quite satisfying and very proud as a fellow Italian-American that he's the Grand Marshal in a city that sent a lot of Italian-American sons to Vietnam, Korea, and World War II.
There was a lot of discomfort when I came back from Vietnam. And a lot of it was, I was one of 591 that were released in Operation Homecoming in the February-March of '73. We were welcomed home. 3 million Vietnam vets had served for 10 years and were not. They were toxic and we were heroes. It's a term I'm not particularly comfortable with. America needed some closure, and we were their closure. We were welcomed home, we were congratulated, the military took really good care of us. And my fellow Vietnam veterans couldn't wear their uniforms in public, couldn't get jobs. I mean, it was really difficult.
I've known Ralph for many years, mostly through his veterans outreach in Delaware County. As a reporter and editor at Delaware County newspapers, I had many interviews with him, many stories I've done on him. and I've gotten to know him.
How he could get through all his trials in Vietnam and still be the same person is, Ralph doesn't focus on himself too much. There's always someone more in need or more important.
I find him as a very humble guy, a very real person, and a person whose heart's in the right place.
He's a family man, a man of faith, a man of passion, a man of someone who has that servant's heart that the Bible talks about.
He's got a tremendous personality. He's a true patriot. And now we have the honor and the pleasure of having him here in the Philadelphia area working with vets, and he does a tremendous job. And I would say that among the most credible spokesmen that we have in the Delaware Valley.
Being an Italian American like myself, we always want to see Italian guys stand up and be recognized. The Italian community has always liked their Rocky Marcianos and Joe DiMaggio's and Rocky Balboa, and Ralph kind of fits into that mold.
And I would always tell him, Ralph, you're going to be on your deathbed and I'm going to ask you, how do you feel? You're going to say, I feel good.
He shares how to battle through grit, through resilience, how to live our best life. Just the special things. He doesn't need to really explain in detail.
I have vet friends of mine that need help, and I call them, and they're ashamed to talk to him. Oh, he's a POW. He don't want to talk to me. But the thing with him is, I think that's one of his favorite things to do in life, help vets.
That's what Ralph Galati does. You know why? Because he cares. He genuinely gives a shit about his brother and sister veterans. He gives a shit about our country because it's our duty to make it better. And you know why? Because he has that love of country stamped on his heart that he'll never give up, that he will always, always pay it forward.